Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print media and cinema. So, we are talking about refugee, Desh and nation. We were talking about the case of Bengal and the complicated situation of refugee influx in the state of West Bengal in the post partition decades, and the situation actually persists due to the Nehru-Liaquat Pact. The border was left porous, and so trickling of refugees kept happening at different historical junctures whenever there was communal tension. On 13th of August 1957, Amrita Bazar Patrika reported criticisms in the Lok Sabha about slow progress of rehabilitation of East Bengal displaced persons, which delayed in execution of schemes and lacked any proper planning on the part of the rehabilitation ministry. So, by 1947, the union minister announced that there was no more room for refugee rehabilitation in West Bengal. Over 40 lakhs of Hindu Bengalis had immigrated from East Pakistan, and out of that population over 30 lakhs were in West Bengal alone. In the case of this heavy exodus, we see that little has been said about how the experience of middle class and educated refugees were actually dominant, and so whenever we talk about the refugee experience, we actually tend to refer through the prism of the middle class and the dominant castes. We do not, scholarship till a long time has not examined the questions of caste and class in the case of Bengal partition. So, scholarship on Bengali refugees generally come from the perspective of the more privileged immigrants. So, people that come from dominant caste and class backgrounds defined the Bengali refugee experience, although further study reveals how the experiences of the poorer section refugees and the subordinate caste groups were vastly different. Like I already referred, Dalit or scheduled caste refugees who were primarily the Namasudras were the last that left East Pakistan for India, mainly for West Bengal. And so, Dalit refugees arrived in India as destitutes, as in completely impoverished conditions. They faced violent communal attacks. They hardly had strong foothold back in their homeland. They were mainly earned their living as fishermen, boatmen, carpenters and peasants, landless tenants, and that became worse after communal violences, and so they arrived to the new land. They arrived in the new land without any social or economic capital, and so they were not in charge of deciding where they could live. They were mostly resettled in suburban areas of West Bengal, and then the government officially devised policies to disperse them to far flung and marginal lands for resettlement, such as in the Andamans and in Dandakaranya. Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy's government argued that the refugee crisis was born out of a national decision to partition India, and so it would be unfair to expect West Bengal to shoulder the entire burden of refugee populace alone. So Dr. Roy insisted that the Bengali refugees are also resettled in other states in post-colonial India. So, the Andaman Islands were brought to the notice of the government of West Bengal by H. J. Stokes, who was the Deputy Secretary of a short-lived Development and Rehabilitation Board, and so Stokes inquired the West Bengal government if they would agree to send, if it would agree to send some refugees for resettlement to the Andaman Islands if a grant of 1300 was made available. So, Dr. Roy agreed to this proposal made by Stokes. So, goal of the central government, like one sees subsequently, was not to rehabilitate the refugees, but to recruit laborers for the Andaman Islands. So the major argument was that these people used to be landless tenants and they used to toil in lands even before the partition. So, there is apparently no harm in exploiting their labor to reconstruct the Andaman Islands. So, in 1949, Bengali refugees were considered as potential recruits to rescue this plan of post-war reconstruction of the Andaman Islands. So, one needs to understand that the vision here is not to resettle the Dalit refugees, but to use their labor force, their manpower to make Andaman habitable basically. And this project was initially designed in 1945, keeping the ex-servicemen in mind. So, there was there was a mutual agreement between the Bengal government and so the clear line between so once there was this clear line of supply established between the refugee camps of West Bengal and the sites of settlement in the Andaman Islands, an integrated scheme started to be materialized. It was so the scheme of colonization and development of the Andamans was launched in 1952, and so most of these resettlers were Bengali refugees from agriculturalist communities, and they were resettled in Andaman Islands between 1952 and 1961. So, during this period, records suggest that around 2,413 families of Bengali Hindu refugees were resettled in the Andaman Islands, and most of them had come from the districts of Barisal, Jashore and Khulna in East Bengal. So, families were sent to be resettled there, and government promised that soon 20,000 acres of forest land are to be cleared and made available for 4,000 agriculturalist families from the mainland. Yet one sees that the laborers that were recruited for clearing the forest in Andamans were also to be from among the refugees. In deporting the refugees to Andamans, the government of West Bengal was attempting to present the refugee problem as a national problem and not a problem of the province. So, one sees that the Dalit refugees were constantly goaded, they were constantly urged to live up to the criteria of being socially useful people that were actively contributing to the post-colonial nation of India. So, for example, Prafulla Chandra Sen in his speech, he was the Chief Minister of West Bengal between 1961 and 1967, and he suggested, Sen suggested that these people, mostly the Dalit refugees that settled in Andaman, make Andaman agriculturally one of the highest rice producing regions. So, they were not being resettled for nothing, something was expected of them in return. They were labor hands, they were clearing forests, and then that is how they were settling in places like Andaman and Dandakaranya. And so, even when we look at the statistical estimate made by Dr. Bidhan Chandra Ray, out of the entire group of Andaman deportees, 11% were out of the entire group of Andaman settlers, 11% were landless peasants, 33% carpenters, small shop managers, fishermen, etc., 1.5% laborers, and therefore, we see that a very insignificant small section of land owning class being a part of this project and being deported to a faraway land. The way rehabilitation happened for the Bengalis, West Bengal was preserved, and the major lands, the important lands, urban posh areas were reserved for rehabilitation of upper caste, middle class, upper class refugees. So, the caste class politics certainly played an important role in the process of resettlement. So, now talking about the Dandakaranya rehabilitation plan, it was conceived in early 1956 to resettle the East Pakistani refugees. At the National Development Council meeting in June 1957, it was formally decided to develop Dandakaranya as a place for permanent resettlement of the displaced persons. And according to Shekhar Bandyopadhyay and Anusua Basu Ray Chaudhury's research, in the early 1950s, the Namasudra population would be secretly shipped off to the Andamans, but this trend was gradually changing. By the mid 1950s, the government policies became more explicit. They explicitly proclaimed their caste bias, and coercive methods were used to transport the Namasudras, the Dalit refugees, for settling in the arid tribal lands of Odisha and Madhya Pradesh. So, this happens more, as Bandyopadhyay notes, this happens more in the absence of Jogen Mandal's leadership. Jogen Mandal was a prominent leader among the Dalit refugees, and he held a position in the Ministry of East Pakistan. So, he had his political agency and awareness to inform, to guide the Dalit displaced population. Yet, in his absence, in the absence of his leadership among the camp refugees, early 1960s onward, we see that the government starts forcefully dispatching the Dalit Bengali refugees to Dandakaranya, and so by 1965, there almost 7,500 families are resettled there. The Dandakaranya scheme was as follows: a plot of 6.5 hectares was given to each family, loans were disbursed for building houses and for purchasing of bullocks and agricultural goods, agricultural equipments, and yet as feedback would come from the settlers, the refugees had to make do. The refugees had to make do with the worst lands, which were hitherto regarded as uncultivable. absolutely arid lands. So, these people that were deported to Dandakaranya had to face inhospitable environment, an alien environment, and desertion became a regular feature. So, government was utilizing manpower and cheap labor of the refugees to develop this backward area. S.K. Gupta states that in Farazgaon zone, 6% of the plots were basically unfit for agriculture, 32% were poor and submarginal, 53% could be of medium quality if their moisture retention capacity could be improved, and only 9% land was of good quality. So, shifting of the refugees to the Dandakaranya was, to an extent, it could be called as a fiasco. It was never successful, hardly an organized and systematic process. The refugees revolted and resisted greatly. So, in East Pakistan, the near total departure of the Hindu upper caste, landed elite and urban middle classes meant that the communal agitation had to be directed against the Hindu untouchables. So like I have already said, the upper class, the elite section refugees had migrated on both sides of the border. Their migration and resettlement was mostly self-rehabilitation, more organized, more systematic, without state intervention. They could exchange their property and they faced the least violence. Many of them were associated with the national politics, and so they had idea of how things would turn out. They had migrated even before partition had taken place. Not so in the case of the untouchables and the Dalits. So, they had to face the brunt. The ones that lacked the means to survive on their own became dependent on government relief, and so they could not choose a good land, say in Calcutta, in the mainland of Calcutta. They had no choice basically. They had to resettle wherever the government wanted them to. So, lacking any caste connections, lacking networking, lacking education, fiscal power, they had to accept the government policy of dispersing them to faraway lands. The government claimed that there was insufficient vacant land in West Bengal, and so this process of dispersal of the Namasudras was a way of unmaking their social mobility. Their unity was broken, and so they were scattered in refugee colonies outside of Bengal, and so Bengal politics in the post-partition period is dominated by the traditional upper caste elite. When we talk of partition, we generally talk, we look at the aspect of religion without so much paying attention to the caste class politics that deeply influenced so caste class factors actually determined so many decisions. The decisions revolved around these two factors. The Bengal politics, like I said, in the post-partition period was dominated by the Bhadralok section, both during the Congress regime and then during the regime of the Communist Party. So, the land of Dandakaranya posed its own problem. They were originally the territory of the tribal people who resented this occupation. They did not like sharing their lands. The tribal people resented sharing these lands with the newcomers. So, the resettlement camps were deplorable, grievances led to movements, and this began at Mana group of camps in Dandakaranya, where the refugees decided to launch a national movement and they sought resettlement in the Sundarban area of West Bengal. So, one of such deportees, Pannalal Dasgupta, says that the Dandakaranya project had fallen prey to the miscommunication among the West Bengal and Madhya Pradesh governments and the Dandakaranya Development Authority. So, the infrastructure also failed to materialize. So, electricity was hardly available, there would be acute shortage of drinking water, there would be lack of medical services, and so frequent epidemics broke out with high rate of child mortality, which unsettled and scared the refugees further. So, we see that the refugees, who were mostly illiterate people, they have their mental scape almost. The illiterate unlettered Dalit refugees have a way of imagining a nation which does not always overlap with the modern machinations. They understand India as Bharatvarsha. So, Dandakaranya, at the mention of Dandakaranya, they would think of Ramayana. Ramayana is a popular text that everyone, regardless of one's caste, social economic belonging, understands in India. So, mention of the dark forests of Dandakaranya would would immediately remind one of the mythical story where Ram was exiled in the Dandakaranya forest. So it is the mythical reality that shapes the unlettered mind, the popular imagination that we have to understand. So we have to understand that the refugees saw themselves as banished. They were as ill-fated as the exiled Ram. By 1964, cases of desertion began to appear in local dailies and they were reported in the national press. For people that do not have that have never participated in the mainstream political political happenings, mainstream political machinations happenings in the larger schemes, their way of thinking merges with the mythical realities that shape the space called India. So, I mean, they would think of India, like I said, more as Bharatvarsha, and in terms of the characters and the worldview that is depicted in the two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. So, Dandakaranya actually hearkened the notion of the banished, the exiled Rama, and that is how they would see themselves. Shaktipada Rajguru's novel Dandok Theke Morichapi was set in the 1970s, and it follows a group of camp refugees who are taken to Malkangiri in the Dandakaranya area. And the novel opens with a description of the inmates in Mana transit camp. It says, uprooted from faraway Bengal and like flotsam and jetsam have stopped at the infertile Mana's banks. 20 years ago, they had come like waves in the hope of rehabilitation in the soil of Dandakaranya. Some among them, the fortunate ones, got homesteads, but a few thousand families were left behind who were still living within the surrounding areas of the Mana camp. So, one of the camp inmates in this novel says, for 7 years we have lived on the charity doles. What is the good of reducing us to beggars? Instead of making the entire race beggars, give us land, a little homestead, let us work and earn our keep. In these last years of our lives, let us live as cultivators as we were born. We do not want to live like beggars. So, this is a dilemma, this is a quandary that faces the Dalit refugees. This is a kind of situation that emerges after partition. They were cultivators, they did not have much, but they had something. So, being reduced to beggars, the lack of dignity posed by the new life, or the new circumstances, the new difficulties posed by the new life, the new difficulties posed by this life as a refugee lacked any respect, any dignity, any human dignity, and so frustrations and aimlessness and the demeaning camp life actually saps energy. It creates a new class of people, actually a new class of beggars who are born and raised in the camps, who live a life of charity, life of joblessness, in tents, in sheds. So, their lives are fraught with frustrations and lethargy. We see that this is something that keeps coming back in the writings of first generation Dalit refugees, how their parents were treated, how they lost whatever little they had, and they were living in subhuman conditions. Inhuman treatments were meted out to them. They were seen as leeches, as social parasites on state resources that would only take from state resources without having anything to give back. Such pejorative associations made with the image of the Dalit refugee actually paralyzed any kind of mobility, any kind of positivity among them. Like Rajguru notes, the darkness of frustrations and lethargy chiefly informed their existence both in the suburban areas of West Bengal and in faraway lands. So, in the next lecture we see how this lead to further repercussions. We talk about the occupation of how the Dalits occupy the Madhyapi area and the state sponsored massacres as a result of that. I end my lecture today. Thank you.